What is washi? What is Japanese paper? I think if we asked 10 people at random from this group here tonight to describe washi, we'd get back 5 or more different answers. For some individuals, the word washi conjures up images of thin, soft, delicate sheets of natural colored handmade paper. Others might imagine richly colored sheets made with various natural dyes and pigments in varied patterns. For others, the same word means papers in a variety of boldly colored, often intricately detailed, heavily printed papers. Still others think of paper used for origami, the craft of paper folding, or of machine-made papers of innovative design and subtle sensibility. Another possibility is thin papers patterned to look like a kind of lace. The list really goes on and on. So which of these varieties of paper can be labeled as washi? Let's look a little bit at the history to try to get a better idea of what washi is. So Cai Lun supposedly invented papermaking in China 1900 years ago. Was this washi? No, of course not. It was Chinese paper, right? So let's move on. Priest Doncho is said to have brought papermaking from Korea to Japan 1400 years ago. Was this washi? Well, when it first entered Japan, it couldn't have been Japanese paper yet, so no. But how about 100 years down the road? Finally, we're getting close. Maybe this was Japanese paper, but it was still not called washi by anyone. Next, we have the development of nagashizuki, what is usually considered the prototypical Japanese paper production method. And this happened probably about 1200 years ago. Was this washi? Probably. Probably. In my mind, paper from this period is the easiest thing to call Japanese paper because its particular way of being made was developed in Japan by Japanese for Japanese. But the word washi still didn't exist yet. The word paper, kami, existed, but not washi. Excuse me. Okay, jumping forward to paper made in the period just before the opening of the country to trade, around 150 years ago. Was this washi? It had to be, right? It had to be. With no outside influence, this had to be quintessentially Japanese paper. But it wasn't called washi yet. So next you have the official opening of the country around 1850 and widespread introduction of foreign paper and soon thereafter Western papermaking technology. The need for a name for Japan-made paper as opposed to foreign-made paper arose at this time, and finally the word washi came into use. Of course, initially this was all handmade exclusively from traditional Japanese bast fibers, kozo, mitsumata, and gampi. But in time, papers made with other fibers, and even on papermaking machines, also came to be called washi. Recently, even papers made outside of Japan that have a certain look or feel have been spotted labeled as washi. So this question is much more complex than it really seems at first glance, and unfortunately there's currently no succinct answer. As unsatisfying as it may be, we have to move on without being able to say exactly what washi is. Ultimately, there are some whose definition of washi includes all of the varieties that I've just shown you, and some who are much more selective. The powers that be in the washi world are currently trying to come to a consensus about this, but it's proving very difficult. It may seem strange to start out the talk by saying, I can't tell you what washi is, but sadly, confusion is the current situation. So for the purposes of this talk tonight, we're going to take a very traditional view of what washi is, as that which is handmade from kozo, mitsumata, and gampi, the 3 traditional bast fibers. Okay? And that leads into the second section, how is washi made? Okay? I want to start this section in the kozo field and give you a sense of the seasons. Kozo is a kind of mulberry, It is the most common raw material for washi making. And I want to mention that most of these images that I'm going to be showing you tonight, from this section at least, are from my time working in Oguni in Niigata Prefecture. And Oguni is Yukiguni, snow country. So the snow is very deep every year during the winter season. And this, what you're looking at right now, is the scene in early April when the stumps of kozo are finally beginning to emerge from the melting snow. By early May, we have lots of fukino-to and other mountain vegetables growing in and around the kozo field. This is my sensei, Imai-san. He is dedicated to making great paper, but he also likes to hunt for mountain vegetables in the forest around the kozo field. Monkey see, monkey do. I'm not sure what I'm doing here really, but I'm looking for some kind of mountain vegetable up in the trees there. This is a typical haul of what we might get. And when we get back to the house, it'll be made into a yummy tempura dinner. This is really a part of the yearly cycle. I just want to give you a taste of what it was like to live and work in a papermaking village. Let's go back to the kozo field. So by late May, the shoots are coming out of the stumps. And you can see places where the tree has been cut down in previous years. And you can also see the new shoots coming out in between. Imai-san fertilizes the field with chicken manure and rotates the soil, all to help get a good crop of kozo. For papermakers who grow their own fiber, this farming is a part of the work they do. Okay, in June, on each tree, the best 6 to 8 branches are left in place, and the remainder are cut down. This is to allow the energy of the plant to be focused into a smaller number of branches in order to get a really good crop. Throughout the rest of the growing season, side shoots are consistently removed to ensure easy processing at harvest time. You can see these side shoots coming out here and here. And while those are still green, they'll be snapped off systematically in order to have the branch be one long, straight branch so that it's easy to process at harvest time. That's a before. Can I go back? There, before and after shot. Okay. So there's always more work to be done in the kozo field, including grass trimming, which you see here. This is approximately October. You can see that the kozo leaves are starting to yellow, and you can also see that the kozo itself is 3 to 5 meters in height. By the time we get into November and harvest season, some of the branches will have grown up to 6 meters in a single season. And that's, you can imagine why kozo is so loved as a source for papermaking fiber. It grows because it grows so quickly, among other things, obviously. But October and November are prime mushroom hunting season. Imai-san also likes to hunt for wild mushrooms. When you get into November and the kozo leaves begin to yellow and drop, and the harvest takes place around the middle of November. So I have some video of the harvesting process. Those are the kozo branches. You can see that they're all perfectly straight without any side branches on them. And there's a stump of a tree that's just been cut down. And there's Imai-san at work harvesting. So the tool that's being used here is a kama, which is a curved blade on the end of a stick. And he makes it look quite easy, but in fact there's a kind of a knack to it. You have to kind of bend the branch at the same time as you're cutting. It's a bit like a puzzle. You've got to try to figure out which one to cut next. And you've got to sort of get your body in there and move around and move the branches. There's a better shot of the tool. Okay, and there are hundreds of trees in the kozo field, and each one is harvested in this way. So it's quite a lengthy process. Takes a number of people about a week or so to do the whole field. You can see here why they call it snow country. This is December, and the steaming and stripping of the kozo takes place throughout December. The kozo sheets are bundled and cut to a uniform length. They're put into a steaming chamber and steamed for 2 to 4 hours. The chamber is opened up and the bundles are removed. The steaming makes it easy to remove the bark. So the bark is loosened at one end, then grasped firmly in one hand, and peeled away from the inner core. The inner stick is used for firewood. Only the bark is used for papermaking. This is one of the main differences between Western papermaking and traditional Japanese papermaking. In the West, they grow the tree to quite a large size. They cut the whole tree down. It's a one-shot thing. And they discard the bark and use the inner part of the tree as the fiber for papermaking. In traditional Japanese papermaking, you harvest every year from the same plant, and you throw away the inner stick and use only the bark for papermaking fiber. Okay, the stripped bark is hung to dry and stored away for later use. And sticky rice, or mochi, is also prepared in this season. You can see here I'm helping to pound mochi with Imai-san's family. The work days in the studio are long, and there's always more work to be done. So tea time is enjoyed by all. Every day at 10 and 3 o'clock we stop for tea and a snack of some kind. And even in the kozo field, we make the time for tea, and often work until dark. Okay, what I've shown you now is the cultivation of kozo. What I want to do is now walk you through the steps of actually making paper. I'm going to give you the basic outline, plus I also want to give some of the variations in tools, techniques, and traditions that lead to the wide variety of papers we know of as washi. So I've divided the Japanese papermaking process into 8 main steps, and I've focused on methods used for paper made entirely or chiefly from kozo fiber. Kozo paper represents about 80% of handmade washi. Be aware that by utilizing other fibers, even further variation is possible in the finished paper. And I should also mention that this 8-step thing is purely my own creation. Different people will have different numbers of steps. There's a description of washi making that says that the paper needs 999 touches to get from fiber to finished paper, and the 1000th touch is the hand of the user. So we're not going to go through 1,000 touches tonight, but I've got 8 steps that I want to talk to you about here. And the first is fiber selection. Okay, as we are limiting our discussion to kozo paper, fiber selection would seem straightforward. However, there are at least 4 botanical varieties of kozo, and within each type there can be wide variation in fiber characteristics depending on the location, climate, and growing conditions. Many paper makers suggest that they are able to make their paper only as a direct result of cultivating their own kozo crop, bringing forth the unique characteristics of their locally grown kozo. Others describe the difficulty of continuing to make their paper as the quality of the fiber they are receiving from suppliers continues to deteriorate or change. So to summarize, fiber selection, you either order the kozo from a supplier or cultivate it yourself, as I've just outlined. Okay, the next step in the process is scraping. Usually the black outer layer of bark is scraped away. So you can see in this shot that kozo bark has 3 layers. There's the outer black bark layer, kurokawa, the middle green layer, amakawa, and the inner white bark layer, shirokawa. And basically it's the shirokawa that is used to make the paper. So the black bark is removed, and often the middle green layer is removed as well. But there are some times when it's left intact. There are varieties of paper, such as sekishubanshi, that are well known for the qualities attributed to the inclusion of the green layer. This practice leads to a crisper, more yellow sheet, which is said to be insect resistant. In one studio I visited, they tried to remove only the top half of this green layer, leaving behind only the softer, more yellow portion. For some papers, it is necessary to remove every trace of discolored, hardened, or otherwise imperfect fiber during the scraping process. Some paper makers trim 1 to 5 centimeters from both ends of the bark strips where discoloration tends to occur. The trimmings are collected and used later to make a different, inferior grade of paper. After the scraping process, the bark may be whitened naturally by exposing it to sun, snow, or cold. Here's a shot of river bleaching. This is a shot of man-made tank bleaching up in the mountains. And this is snow bleaching. And I should note that I'm using the word bleaching, but it's a totally natural process. There's no chlorine or any chemical of any kind used here. It's a totally natural process. I have a before and after shot here. This is before, when the kozo is laid out early in the morning on the snow. And this is the after shot on the afternoon of the same day. So again, this is a detail before and after. So you can see that it makes quite a difference even in just, well, 6 or 8 hours. Okay, next is the cooking. The bark is cooked with an alkali to remove non-cellulosic materials. The most common agent for cooking fiber in Japan today is soda ash. It's a snap to use and relatively gentle on the fiber. But it's not the only choice, and the selection of an alkali has a great effect on the finished paper. For example, caustic soda is a potent chemical that will remove the outer black layer during cooking, while it allows the papermaker to skip the tedious and time-consuming step of scraping. It can damage the fiber. So it's not generally recommended. Cooking with lye of wood ash is the traditional method and tends to be gentle on the cellulose. It is widely respected as the appropriate choice for warm, natural, long-lasting papers. The term wood ash is generically used to refer to ashes made from burning a wide variety of plant materials, including various hardwoods, but also plants or waste from plants such as rice straw, buckwheat husk, and mugwort. Historically, it was well known that the quality of the finished paper would change depending on what material was burned to make the lye. For example, lye made specifically from taro stem ash was said to produce a luster in the finished sheets unattainable with other ashes. The use of wood ash as an alkali is actually rare in contemporary Japanese papermaking, reserved for the most traditional production only. And the distinction between lyes of different plant ashes is no longer common knowledge. So the kozo is cooked in a cauldron like this, a big pot that like you can see here. Water is put in the cauldron, then your alkali is added, and finally the kozo is dropped in. And the whole thing is cooked for 2 hours or more. After cooking, the binders and non-cellulosic materials have been dissolved, and we are left with close to 100% cellulose. So next, the fiber will be rinsed. The degree to which the fiber is rinsed after cooking can also change its quality. A brief rinse leaves behind more of the hemicelluloses and binders that have been worked loose during cooking, and their inclusion in the fiber stock creates a crisper sheet. A more thorough rinse will tend to leave behind only cellulose, creating a softer, more flexible sheet. Before beating, the cooked, rinsed fiber is generally picked over to remove any remaining bits of black bark and other debris in a process referred to as Chittitalli. So each strand of bark will be examined one by one, and any impurities or bits of remaining black bark will be removed at this point. This is very tedious work, but everybody has to do it. It's just a part of the process. This is a living national treasure, Ichibe Iwano, and his son working at Chittitalli in their studio. So what you have at this point is really a web of fiber, a web of cellulose that is ready for beating, which will pull apart the individual fibers. Next is beating. It is rather rare today, but some papers are made with fiber beaten entirely by hand. It is the gentlest approach and tends to leave the natural length of the fibers intact. However, it takes time and strenuous effort. Instead, most paper makers today use a Naginata beater, and some also employ a stamper beater. The Naginata is convenient, but its aggressive action tends to slightly shorten the fiber. Many paper makers settle in the middle, starting with hand or stamper beating, and then finishing the process in the Naginata. So this is the hand beating shot. It's just a big block of wood with a handle, and you just pound away at it until all of the individual fibers are separated out. This is a stamper beater. You can see that it's just a big block of wood on a shaft, and up above, you can't see it in this shot, but up above there's a mechanism which will raise and slightly rotate and then drop the block of wood, and raise, slightly rotate and drop, raise, rotate and drop, and the fiber gets beaten in that way. This is the Naginata beater. You can see that it has these curved blades on the inside, and those will rotate in a clockwise direction. And you can see that the blades are pointed, but they're actually not sharpened. So you can't cut yourself, and it doesn't cut the fiber. That's another one of the main differences between Japanese papermaking and Western papermaking. In Japan, they try to keep the natural fiber length as intact as they can, just tease apart the fiber into their individual fibers. In Western papermaking, they use a different kind of beater called a Hollander beater, which tends to grind and cut the fiber and shortens the length of it. And this is one of the reasons why Japanese paper can be so thin and yet so strong at the same time, is because of the fiber length. Okay, for most papers, the bark strands are carefully rinsed after cooking, but historically, all of the best papers were made from fiber that was also rinsed after beating. For example, hosho is still produced by rinsing the fiber extensively after beating to remove any remaining impurities and excess hemicelluloses, excuse me. The rinsing affords the paper its signature softness. Next is formation, but we must prepare the vat first. So water is added to the papermaking vat. Water quality is also critical. It lends its own characteristics to the finished paper. Some paper makers use water collected from mountain runoff. Some swear by river water, and others use city tap water, filtered or not. One papermaker I spoke to insisted that if the same fiber was processed using water from various regions of Japan, the difference in the finished sheets would immediately be noticeable. The fiber is added to the vat, and there's one more very important ingredient which must be added, and that is neri. Neri is a gooey liquid which is generally derived from the roots of the Tororo aoi plant, which you can see, and can see in that shot. So the roots are smashed and soaked in water. They exude a gooey substance. If you're thinking okra, you're in the right neighborhood. It's a relative of the okra plant. And the roots are sifted out of the mixture, which is then strained through fine cloth in order to obtain this gooey substance, formation aid or neri. Selecting the appropriate formation aid or neri can help the papermaker achieve the right shake for different types of paper. For instance, when making tengujo, a papermaker will use very strong formation aid to allow for the rigorous action required to make the thin tissue-like paper. One paper maker explained to me that he uses the bark of the Nori Utsugi tree for neri, as it gives him the right action at the vat to make his particular type of paper. The more common and less expensive Tororo Aoi would not allow him to make his particular paper. So the water and the fiber and the neri are added to the vat and mixed very well. Also at this point, some additive may be mixed in, such as clay or shell powder. This helps to even out the surface of the paper by filling in the spaces between the fibers, preventing expansion and contraction in the finished sheets, and also reducing insect damage. Okay, so finally we get to actual sheet forming. I want to describe the papermaking tool. It's the sugeta, which this papermaker is holding in her hands here. Sugeta consists of two parts, the su and the keta. The keta is the frame, the outer frame that you can see here, and you can see that it's hinged across the back here, so the whole thing opens up from the front. And in between the upper and lower frames is inserted a screen, a bamboo screen, or su. Okay, and now that I've shown you the sugeta, I want to just step back once and further explain the importance of neri. So to make paper, the papermaker will use the sugeta to scoop up some of the pulp solution, and the liquid will drain away through the screen, leaving the fiber on the top of the screen. The addition of neri slows down the drainage of the pulp solution. Without neri, the water would drain through the screen immediately, leaving a sort of clumpy mess on the top of the screen. With neri, the papermaker has time to rock the solution back and forth, depositing the fiber in an even layer on the surface of the screen. Generally, paper is made in Japan using the Nagashizuki technique, in which the papermaker moves the mold vigorously, building up layers of fiber and throwing off the excess pulp back into the vat. Some papers are made using the tamezuki method, which is similar to Western-style papermaking, and others require a combination of the two. The style of the shake can make a huge difference in the finished paper. A high-speed, vigorous action tends to create thin, soft sheets with even formation, whereas a relaxed, leisurely shake tends to produce thicker, denser sheets with cloudy formation. Okay, next I have some video of the papermaking sheet forming process. I have three paper makers that I want to show you. This is the first. He's making a fairly thin type of paper. You see that the action, the shaking, is rather small and quick. And in general, the whole papermaking process here is very quick. He's done in less than 30 seconds. He's going to wait for the water to drain some more. And then take it over his head and couch it or lay it down directly on top of the other sheets that he's already made. I apologize for the radio in the background here. It's kind of obnoxious, but okay, so the whole thing took less than a minute, right? Then I have the second paper maker. He's making a fairly thick type of paper. You can see that the action at the vat is much slower, not smaller, but less vigorous. But he's also done fairly quickly. He's going to put a string in between the sheets to help part the sheets later on during the drying process. And he's going to lay the sheet down directly on top of the other sheets that he's already made. Okay, and the third paper maker is making a sort of mid-weight sheet. Scoop up some pulp, push it across the screen, and immediately stop and get a pair of tweezers and pull out any impurities or clumps of fiber that he's found on the surface of the screen. Okay, dips again and stops again. Take out any impurities or debris. You can see that he's being very, very careful about the surface of the paper. He's removing any impurities as he goes along. Most paper makers don't stop in that way, but this paper maker does. And you can see that the action here, he's got a big action here, back and forth, front to back, and then a small action from right to left. Combines the two. You can see that this paper maker takes a lot longer time to make a single sheet of paper, and for that reason probably this paper will be much more expensive when it goes for sale. He's going to put a piece of string in between the sheets. Turn it over his head and lay it down behind him. Okay, so there's 3 different paper makers, just to give you a sense that every paper maker really has their own shake, and if they were required for some reason to alter their shake, the quality of the paper would also change in the process. Okay, I talked about the paper-making screen, or su. It is commonly made from bamboo splints, and the size of the splints and the spacing of the sewing will show in the finished paper. For that reason, a su may occasionally be covered with a sha, which is a mesh usually woven from silk. Using a sha minimizes or eliminates the impression of the su in the finished sheets. So a string is inserted between the sheets to make separating them easier, as you saw in the video already. And the sheets are couched or laid down one on top of the other. Though it may not fit neatly within the category of formation, I should mention the seasons. It is generally believed that the fresher the fiber and the neri are, the better the finished paper will be. In warmer months, the fiber spoils quickly and the neri loses its strength, while in the coldest months, the fiber and neri stay fresh longer. Traditionally in Japan, farmers made paper during the winter months when work in the fields was slight. Today, some paper makers produce the same kind of papers year-round. Others make their best or namesake papers only in the winter months and produce lesser quality paper during the summer. A very small percentage of paper makers refrain from making paper during Japan's hottest and muggiest days, instead tending to their kozo field, maintaining and repairing equipment, or cleaning the studio. Okay, the next step is pressing. The stack of papers is generally left overnight to drain and then put in the press the next morning and pressed slowly over a number of hours. Next is drying. After pressing, the sheets are still damp and they are peeled off one by one and brushed onto a flat surface and allowed to dry. The character of a paper is affected greatly by the manner in which it is dried. A heated metal plate is a fast, reliable, and convenient drying surface, but it can be harsh on the fibers. Today, stainless steel is used, but in the early part of the 20th century, when metal dryers were first being used, steel sheets were employed, which left metal traces in the paper and eventually led to discoloration. Even with stainless steel, some suggest that traces of metal are still being transferred to the paper. So, drying on wooden boards is a more natural process. The board gets wet when the sheet is applied, and as the sheet dries, the board dries along with it, contracting at about the same rate, and thus reducing stress to the fibers. Drying on boards is usually done outside in direct sunlight, which has the added effect of whitening the sheets. In winter, the boards can be set out on the snow, and the reflected sunlight can further increase the whitening. However, board drying takes more time than drying on a metal dryer. So, some paper makers have a hybrid method. They brush up the paper onto wooden boards and then put them into heated drying chambers. Okay, the final step in the process is curation. Most papers are inspected and graded before shipping to the distributor or being put on the shelf for sale to customers. The sheets are sorted according to weight, and any differences or imperfections are generally sorted out at this time. The papermaker may also decide to store the paper for a few months or even years. This aging process helps to strengthen the bonds between the fibers and settle the paper. One papermaker I know refuses to ship any paper that has not been aged at least 2 years. So you can just imagine, after this incredibly lengthy process, then you have to sit on your stock for 2 years. It's kind of hard to believe, but there are paper makers who do that. Okay, so that's the production method of washi, the basics of, and well, some of the basics and some of the not so basics, I suppose. The next section I have is how is washi used? And I want to talk about how washi is being and has been used historically. The variety here is really endless. There's more to show than is really possible. I've kind of cherry-picked a few things that I thought were interesting. I won't even talk about the varied artistic uses for washi, of which, of course, there are many. And I'm going to start with some more sort of obvious or well-known examples and then move into some that are maybe less well-known. So shoji screens, of course, is washi stretched on a wooden frame. Washi is the ideal material here due to its soft translucency and ability to diffuse and reflect light. Fusuma sliding doors or wall partitions using washi allows the fusuma to remain thin and light but still very strong. It also provides a surface for artistry. Strength, lightness, and soft translucency make washi the perfect material for lanterns and lamps. Lanterns continue to play a part in Japanese festivals, especially Obon, and they're also suitable for interiors as seen in the Akari line by Isamu Noguchi. Fans, even in hot and humid Japan, they do more than just cool you off. They can be seen as a kind of symbol of Japanese culture that has been employed historically by people in all walks of life. Due to its great strength, even when very thin, washi is the perfect material for umbrellas and parasols, which need to withstand constant folding and unfolding. Next we have Coyote. Coyote are tightly twisted strips of washi. When washi is twisted in this way, it becomes extremely tough and was historically used for hair ties and bookbinding, among other things. I teach a bookbinding class at Asia University, and we still use Coyote to do the bindings. Unbelievably thick cords of washi were historically used as armor bindings, and apparently no sword could cut through them. Mizuhiki is a kind of special variety of coyote, which is starched and colored, and they're used for wrapping and decorating gifts and envelopes. There are intricate rules attached to the etiquette of their colors and method of tying, and they're also used in various crafts. Washi has been used in place of fabric. This is shifu that you're looking at here. The slide is a little out of focus, I apologize. Shifu is fabric woven with paper thread. So the paper is cut into strips and spun into thread first, and then woven into fabric. That's called shifu. And shifu has served as material for underclothing, summer kimonos, obis, bags and purses, and even as finely meshed mosquito netting. Washi has been used in place of plastic. Paper string was woven and then lacquered to make all variety of items, such as purses, boxes, luggage, hats, and tobacco pouches. Another kind of washi cloth is Kimiko. This is washi treated with konnyaku paste. Konnyaku is devil's tongue root, and when the washi is treated with konnyaku paste, it becomes extra strong, waterproof, and windproof, and is used for robes, coats, and vests. What you're looking at here is a contemporary example, but it has been used for centuries by the priesthood. For example, in the Omizutori ceremony in Nara. Next we have katagami. Washi is coated with kakishibu. Kakishibu is fermented, unripe persimmon juice. So the washi is coated with kakishibu first and then smoked for a number of days in a smokehouse. Then it's cut into these intricate stencils, which are then used to dye fabric and paper. Washi has been used in place of leather. Kin Cara Kawashi is a paper imitation of embossed, gold-leafed European leather wallpaper that was popular in Japan in the 17th and 18th centuries and eventually exported back to Europe during the Meiji period. Incredibly, washi has been used in place of steel. This is kaminabe, is a type of cooking in which paper is used instead of a pot. And the reason, I understand, the reason the washi doesn't burn is because the temperature of the boiling water is below the ignition point of the paper. And finally, in this section, we have balloon bomb paper. Not many people are aware of it, but during the Second World War, thousands of balloons 10 meters in diameter were sent across the Pacific Ocean on the jet stream. They carried an explosive device and were intended to target American and Canadian cities, forests, and farmlands. The balloons were made entirely of paper, which had been treated with konnyaku paste. And if that isn't a wonder material, I don't know what is. And as a special treat tonight, I have something for the audience to see later on in regard to balloon bomb paper. Stay tuned for an announcement at the end of the talk. Okay, I'd like to briefly talk about some of the systems in place to preserve washi. In Japan, the Agency for Cultural Affairs recognizes special objects or skills as cultural properties worthy of special protection and/or promotion. The most widely known of the Agency for Cultural Affairs designations are the tangible and intangible cultural properties. And I just want to briefly explain the difference between tangible and intangible cultural properties. This is directly from the Agency for Cultural Affairs website. Tangible cultural properties denotes objects such as structures, paintings, sculptures, and works of craft. In contrast, intangible cultural properties are performing arts, craft techniques, or other skills that are embodied and transmitted by specific individuals and groups. In other words, the fundamental difference between intangible and tangible cultural properties is that intangible cultural properties are not the products of the techniques practiced by the individuals or groups, but are instead skills, behaviors, and actions of people. So the popular term living national treasure is actually something of a misnomer that is in fact never used by the Agency for Cultural Affairs, but is adopted by the public at large to refer to individuals who hold the intangible cultural property. So colloquially we say Ichibei Iwano IX is a living national treasure, but factually he is a preserver of an important intangible cultural property. Currently, at the national level, there are 6 papermaking-related important intangible cultural properties, and I just want to go briefly over the papermaking-related designations. So in 1968, Eshiro Abe was recognized for the skills to make Izumo Gampishi, and the same year, Ichibei Iwano VIII was recognized for the skills to make Echizen Hoshoshi. The following year, Honminogami Preservation Society for Honminogami, and Sekishubanshi Preservation Society for Sekishubanshi. A number of years later, in 1978, Hosokawa Preservation Society for Hosokawashi. And then more recently, 3 individuals have been recognized. Ichibei Iwano IX was recognized in 2000 for the skills to make Echizen Hoshoshi. In 2001, Sajio Hamada for Tosa Tengujoshi. And in 2002, Takenobu Tanino for Najio Gampishi. So for these cultural property papers, only the most traditional methods are employed. For most of these papers, the cultural property designation means no imported raw materials, no chemical bleaching, no highly caustic cooking, no skimping on chittitalli, no machine beating, no extra large sheet sizes, no heated metal dryers, and generally no time or labor saving actions of any kind. So the Agency for Cultural Affairs gives financial and logistical support in order to help these papers to continue to be made into in the traditional manner into the future. You may have heard something recently about washi being recognized by UNESCO, and I thought I would just talk briefly about that as well. In 2014, washi, or craftsmanship of traditional Japanese handmade paper, was recognized as a UNESCO Cultural Heritage item, and there were 3 papermaking areas which were recognized. That was Sekishu, Mino, and Ogawa Higashi Chichibu. So Sekishu Banshi is made in Shimane Prefecture. Honminoshi is made in Gifu Prefecture. And Hosokawashi is made in Saitama Prefecture. And it turns out it's really too soon to say exactly what kind of effect this is going to have on the papermaking world. Although some businesses I spoke to have said that they have seen a small uptick in interest since the designation. If you're anything like me, you're wondering, out of all of the papermaking areas in Japan, why only these 3 locations were selected. It turns out that these 3 locations were selected by UNESCO for the following reasons. The first is that kozo, or mulberry, is being actively cultivated in the area. A lot of places in Japan get their kozo from a fiber supplier, a central supplier, so they're not using local kozo. But in these 3 places, kozo is actively being cultivated. Second reason is traditional knowledge and skills are being handed down from generation to generation, and washi making is an integral part of the local community. In many places there are just 1 or 2 paper makers left in a certain location, and washi is no longer really a part of the community. But in these 3 locations it continues to be. Okay, and the third reason, and I think honestly the most important reason that these 3 places were selected, is that only these 3 places have groups for the preservation of washi skills that are already registered as Japanese important intangible cultural property holders. So I think having that designation in place probably made a big difference for these areas. Okay, so we're hurtling towards the end here. I think I'm going to be a little bit ahead of time here, but I want to go through, the last section is modern uses. I want to talk about some of the more modern uses for washi, some of which I'm hoping you should be able to emulate in order to integrate washi into your daily life. So for this section, I'm going to start by going back to Oguni. I told you that Imai-san is my sensei, and he has recently built a new home for himself and his family, and it's something of a showcase for washi, what you can do with washi. You see here washi on the walls. Washi on the ceilings. And shoji screens throughout the house. This is the kids' playroom. And there's one of Imai-san's kids for scale. More shoji screens. And here is Imai-san and his wife papering the front entrance to their home, the genkan. And they're using sake label sized paper here. Imai-san and his crew at the Oguni papermaking factory make sake labels for Kubota sake. And they've used the same tool to make this paper, and you can see some of it's treated with kakishibu. Okay, there's one other company that's doing some nice things with interiors that I wanted to show you, and that is Kamism. And these are shots taken directly from their catalog. I can imagine some of you are saying, oh sure, I'm going to paper my whole house with washi, I'll never be able to afford that. But it's not necessary to do your whole house. You can do one room or even a small accent wall, and then it becomes a much more reasonable proposition. Okay, next is Cara Commie, and Cara Commie is a special type of printed paper that is printed with ink that has some mica mixed into it, so it's reflective, as you can sort of make out in this shot. These are some of the boards, wooden boards that are wooden blocks that are used to do the printing, and some postcards, handmade postcards that are printed with Cara Commie patterns. This is made by, these papers are made and sold by my friend Yamazaki-san, and this is his brother who does the printing. You can see here that the papers are available in all kinds of colors and all kinds of patterns. And they're also available anywhere from postcard size up to wallpaper size. Okay, another friend of mine, Sugihara-san, coordinates with department stores to use washi in display windows. This is Takashimaya, a couple of years ago, I think. You can see that it's all handmade paper, if you can call this paper. It's really something more than paper, but it has a very contemporary feel. Okay. Next I want to talk about some architectural works, and there are a lot of people who are doing these kinds of interiors with washi, but probably the most well-known is this person, Eriko Horiki. She makes these large installation scale pieces that use washi, and they generally make use of light in some way. really large in scale and quite beautiful. Okay, another friend of mine, Hatano Wataru, makes papers in a wide variety of colors and sizes, and then uses those brightly colored papers to make a wide variety of items, including boxes and bags, and of course stationery. Not many people send snail mail these days, but if you do send something on washi, it makes a huge impact. It's a really nice way to incorporate washi into your daily life. So there's some boxes there, bags. This is some keychains, and some more of his boxes. Okay, next thing I want to talk about is a business card holder. If you're spending any time in Japan, you have to have a business card holder, right? So this is a perfect way for you to incorporate washi into your life, is with a washi business card holder from Keijusha. They make all kinds of washi goods, more than just business card holders, but I wanted to show you this because I thought that was a perfect way for you to incorporate washi into your daily life. And then last thing in this section is washi as an artist material. I haven't really talked much about washi as an artist material tonight, but it's of course very much very appropriate for use as an artist material in various kinds of art making. And one specific thing that I'm going to mention tonight is if you are a printmaker, you can make an artist proof or a series of artist proofs on washi. Do your regular addition on whatever paper you're comfortable with, and then use the washi for your artist proof. And in this way you can pass along the extra price. Many artists balk at the price of washi, but in this way you can pass along the extra price to your buyer. And the thing about price is that in the end it sort of doesn't matter. When many artists, as I said, balk at the price of washi, but once they try it, most artists don't go back to whatever they were using before. Okay, I'm a little bit ahead of time, but this is my final slide. I want to close with this quote from Soetsu Yanagi. I would be accused of exaggeration if I were to say that any kind of washi is beautiful. I will then say rather, show me something ugly in washi. It is impossible. The process by which it is made promises just that much beauty. So paper made, even today, when made in the traditional way, is without defect. So no matter how it's used, no matter where it's used, the warmth and subtle beauty of this wonder material shines through. And I encourage you to seek it out and make use of it. Thank you very much. So I'm just going to pop up these websites up from the last section in case you didn't get those the first time through. I know I went through fairly quickly. And I'll be happy to take questions at this point. Yeah, this is one of the other functions of neri. The fibers get laid down onto the screen so that they're all running basically in one direction. They're not all running in one direction, but at the very beginning he dips and casts it across the screen, and that puts all of the first fibers all in one direction. So the bottom of the sheet and the top of the sheet are all with the fibers in one direction. And when they're laid down on top of each other, they just don't grab onto each other. They get laid down onto the screen in kind of this way. They get set down parallel to the screen. And so when they're laid one on top of another, they're not really interacting with each other. They're flat one on top of the other. In Western papermaking, no, it's not because it's turned over. It's
top. Is there a right side and a wrong side?
There is. There is a right side and a wrong side, and many paper makers will have a sort of a preferred way of turning or not turning. But the fact that it's sloshed across the screen makes the fiber sit down like this. And when it sits down like this, when it goes down on the other fiber, it just goes straight on top of it. It doesn't really interact with the fiber. If you do paper making using the same material, but using a slower or a tamezuki style sheet forming method, which is the Western method, you scoop and just give a little shake and stop and let it drain. The fibers are this way and this way. And so they grab onto each other when they're placed one next to the other. And that's why generally they put a sheet of felt or something in between the fibers. Whereas in washi, it's laid down on the screen and it sits on top like that. And one sheet doesn't really interact with the next sheet. And that's partly what neri's role is it's there to make the drainage slower, but it also helps the paper maker to move the liquid across the screen to allow the fiber to lay down in that way. I think the draw for the makers is probably different from maker to maker. I don't know if I can really say for everybody what that is, but I think you touched on it. It's seeing the user use the paper. In the introduction, we heard about the fact that I did helped to bring some paper makers to Toronto in 2008, and there was the World Washi Summit was done in Toronto in 2008, and the paper makers got to see the users of their paper and meet the users of their paper and see the work that the artists had made on their paper, and they were all in tears because they don't usually get that kind of an opportunity. They produce their paper and send it out to the distributor or put it out, sell it in their store, but it's very rare for somebody to come back and say, hey, look what I made with this. It happens, but it's rather rare. So that was a really great experience, I think, for them. I think as I mentioned in the very end, that there's this kind of warmth and brilliance that comes from washi that I think is just not available in any other material. And I think that's what has lured me in. I can say that another thing that I really like about washi is that if you look closely, you can see the individual fibers. If you look at Western paper, it just looks like plastic. It doesn't look like paper. I mean, if it's handmade paper, you might have a chance to see the fibers, but even still, with Western handmade paper, it's harder to see the individual fibers, whereas with washi, you can see every single fiber intact on the sheet, and that I think is, for me, part of the lure. Well, it's a number of things, and some of which I mentioned, but you'll find that, for example, a pen will work on Western handmade paper, but may have a difficult time working on Japanese paper. So it's because the brush is used in Japan, or was used in Japan, that the paper is the way that it is, I think. That's a big part of it anyway. Yeah, I'm trying to think what other things are different about it. The way it's processed, the way the fiber is processed, which I mentioned, is a big thing. And the way, just the shake, the way that it's formed at the vat is also very different. So all of those things, the fiber, the shake, the processing, the uses, all of those things I think contribute to make quite a big difference really between the two kinds of paper.
I heard that Japanese paper lasts longer than Western paper, 1,000 years.
Sure.
Do you think that was intended or just happened?
Well, I think it might not have been intended at first, but once people figured out that, hey, look, we made this 25 years ago and it's still fine, or my grandfather made this 100 years ago and it's still fine, then they started to think about how long it might last, and they started to look at the processes that they used in order to make sure that it did continue to last that long. Because of course you can make paper in a lot of different ways, and if you use a certain alkali, you're going to make the paper less likely to last 1,000 years. If you use a different alkali, if you use, as I mentioned, if you use wood ash lye, you're more likely to have a long-lasting paper. So I think eventually they figured that out, and they started to try and capitalize on it. Yeah. And many paper makers are very proud of the fact now that it's on their website, it's on their business card, etc., that the paper will last 1,000 years. Yeah.
Thank you.
Okay. I'm sure a lot of people in Echizen are wondering that too. I think if you look at, if you take a sampling of all of the paper that's coming out of Echizen, that most of it is wood pulp. Most of it is not made with traditional bast fibers anymore. There are places where they're using kozo, mitsumata, and gampi, of course, but the largest selection of it is Western paper-making fibers and methods. And there's a lot of machine-made paper being made there as well. And I think that is the main reason why Echizen probably was not chosen. That's my guess anyway. Not necessarily, no. As I think I said when I was talking about including the green layer in the fiber, and that being helping to resist insect damage, that is a kind of it is said about washi with a green layer left in the fiber that it prevents insect damage. But I know at least one person who has told me that he's done testing with insects and the different kinds of paper, and that they like the green stuff just as much as they like anything else. So I don't think just because it has insect damage doesn't mean that the paper is poor quality. It may mean that it's even better quality, actually, because it's pure kozo. Exactly.